Hello and welcome to the Crypto Beat. My name is Tim Copeland, I'm the Block's editor-in-chief. Joining me today we have Morpho co-founder and CEO Paul Frambot. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. What about you?
Doing well, thank you. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor and crypto tax software provider Awaken. Use the code TheCryptoBeat for $25 of free credit.
The only thing worse than getting rugged by Hawk Tuah is doing crypto taxes. Meet Awaken, crypto tax software that actually works. Built for degens by degens. What's their magic? Maybe it's in their automatic integration with the most popular blockchains and exchanges. Maybe it's their custom support for more than 25,000 smart contracts, which allows them to label over 90% of your transactions for you. Or maybe it's their custom AI assistant that helps you label any transaction you're still not sure about. Still not convinced? It gets even better. This year, transactions on Solana, Base, Bitcoin, Hyperliquid, and Sui are 100% free. So stop using tax software that could be losing you money and get started with Awaken for free. Use code TheCryptoBeat for $25 off credit or click the link below.
Now, today's episode is around crypto lending. So what is Morpho and how does it work?
Morpho is a permissionless and immutable lending and borrowing infrastructure. So essentially, people use it to earn interest on one end and borrow crypto with crypto collateral on the other end. And most importantly, builders, large distribution platforms leverage this infrastructure to build their own specific lending and borrowing products, leveraging on-chain rails.
So what's the difference, say, between like Morpho and Aave?
So the main difference between Morpho and Aave is that Aave is a specific lending product. Say you can think of it as a fund where essentially you deposit your money on Aave, and the Aave community is gonna manage the risk and the code of the platform. So for example, they're gonna change the collateral exposure that you get exposed to. They're gonna create the code, etc., etc. So it's really like a lending product, but it's a very specific one, right? Morpho is more of an infrastructure that lets you build permissionlessly your own Aave in some sense, right? Where you get to get exposed to the collateral that you want, the oracle that you want, and you get to choose, right? And so what that means is that, large platforms, take the example of Coinbase or that want to offer lending and borrowing services to their users, they can leverage the Morpho infrastructure in order to build those specific products for their specific needs, while owning the code, right? The code is completely immutable as well. And so they have full ownership over the risk, the code, and the fees, right? So one is an infrastructure, the other is a specific product.
What are the risks of this if this is permissionless? So like, could I set up a very shady like lending market? That would be pretty bad for anyone that put any money in it.
Absolutely. Actually, the fun story is that the very first markets that were created on Morpho, like the few seconds after which we deployed the Morpho protocol and announced it, was completely shady markets, right? Like that people created. Same thing on Uniswap, right? Like on Uniswap, you have a ton of markets that obviously get filtered out for the user when they interact with a specific product, whether it is through uniswap.org or through another platform. But at the core, the Morpho protocol is very much like an internet protocol, right? Where like HTTP or SMTP, which is, fully permissionless and that anyone can use. It's on the application side to actually filter out what is, relevant for the specific user. So, the core protocol is risk agnostic. It's compliance agnostic as well. And the application chooses what risk is best for the user. It also chooses, what is the specific compliance that it should comply to, for example, if needed. And all of this is externalized from the core protocol.
And are any Morpho vaults then more risky than others? I know they're sort of like, they seem to employ different strategies.
Yes, 100%. So, it's a permissionless platform. So we have many so-called risk curators, which are essentially, Morpho builders that are going to build products similar to what you can have on Aave, for example, right? Actually, Compound, that used to run their own lending and borrowing protocol, is now running Morpho vaults, right, themselves. And so essentially those curators, usually what they do is like they provide for each asset different, offerings. So, if I take the example of Gauntlet, for example, which is one of the risk managers of Morpho, I believe they have 3 different offerings. They have Gauntlet Prime, Gauntlet Core, and Gauntlet Frontier. And you can think of them as like, one is super low risk and, low yield. Actually, it's much better than treasuries, but it's still, low yield compared to some crypto rates. Then the Gauntlet Core is more of like higher risk, higher yield. That's going to expose you to like maybe 10 collateral approximately. And then Frontier is like really, looking for the highest possible yield, even if that means taking significantly more risk, right? Which is, by the way, a nuance you did not have in crypto a few years ago. Like we've, learned and experienced DeFi through it's either risk-free or completely rugged. And the truth is is a bit in between. Like obviously, like in the real world and in traditional financial world, you have a very large spectrum of like the risk reward curve and depending on what is the risk tolerance and profile of users.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting the compound thing. So you've got a platform that is its own thing, but now it's doing vaults on Morpho. Like, why are they doing that? Do you think this is like? Do you think you see them transitioning fully over to like Morpho, or is this just like customer acquisition? Can you explain that?
In our perspective, there is a clear need for DeFi protocols in general to transition from end-to-end products, teams that build the smart contract code, the account abstraction, the risk management, the compliance management, the application, et cetera, into a certain layering, right? Where the core DeFi protocol focuses on what it does best, which is executing safely the core financial primitives and connecting the different sides of the markets at one specific place on chain. And all the layers of management, of apps, etc., should be externalized. And the reason it should be the case is because this is the only way we're going to be able to actually scale operationally and answer the needs of the broader financial system. So if you think just crypto right now, it's like $20 billion of loans. It's not that interesting compared to like the multiple trillions of daily volume that you have in repo lending in TradFi, for example. And in order to get there, it's pretty obvious that, at least to us, that you're going to need to scale you're going to need multiple different entities that are going to operate different lending services for specific needs. But they can all share one thing in common, which is the code and the network effects, right? To some extent. And so Morpho is providing this. And now platforms like Compounds that are, issuing specific loans for a specific kind of collateral can simply reuse the Morpho tech that, give them, new abilities without having to develop like a Compound for example. So I don't know specifically what are the plans of like the Compound DAO. Like I can't speak in their names, but so far as I've had a great experience building on Morpho and seeing like significant traction on this. And to me, it would make sense that they end up like being a full curator of Morpho and extending their capabilities with the Morpho stack, as opposed to have to rebuild their own code, re-audit it, etc., to essentially do something that is commoditized, right?
And is the Morpho token sort of like have function on the platform, or is it just like a governance token?
Right. So the Morpho token does not have any, specific, complex like Morpho economics like mechanism. Like I'm generally quite skeptical of how tokens can fulfill a role beyond being the tool that lets you own a share of the network, right? To me, tokens are actually a very simple thing, which is essentially just owning a stake in the project, right? And whether it's like a governance right or more. And so it does not play a role in the mechanism in itself. Like the mechanism is independent from, it's an immutable smart contract and that runs completely independently than the Morpho token. However, it is, owned, quote unquote, like by the Morpho token orders. What I mean by owned is that the Morpho token orders have control over the fee switch of the protocol and where the fee streams can actually be directed to. So it's a much smaller scope than in most DeFi protocols, but to me it's really what makes the most sense, right? Because when you think of it, you can't really ask token orders to be knowledgeable and active enough to make very complex decisions, right? You have some models where tokens are used to manage the lending protocol, right? to me, it's very hard to imagine that token holders should be aware of like the thousands and thousands of risk parameters that need to be updated real time, depending on hundreds of thousands of like complex quantitative conditions. And so, to me, it makes much more sense to reduce the role of tokens to just ownership in the network, right? Which simplifies the whole thing, and I believe is the right way to work with tokens.
So where you at with the sort of fee switch idea? Has it been proposed? Has it been implemented? Is that in discussions?
Right. So the fee switch in the Morpho protocol can be activated under a Morpho DAO vote, right? So anyone can come in and say, hey, uh, you know, should we activate the fee switch? Vote yes, vote no, and from there it can be activated. I think that the main considerations that the DAO should have in mind in order for this to happen are multiple, right? You have some growth and strategic consideration. Do you want to slow down? Like if the Morpho DAO aims at growing as much as possible, is activating the fee switch the best strategy now? Right? It's one strategic question that needs to be answered, especially given that the Morpho Association has raised like now $70 million in total and has a lot of capital to fund future developments of the protocol and grants, etc. Other considerations are obviously legal considerations, right? Like activating a fee switch has non-trivial legal consequences, whether it's like tax implications or juridic implication as well. And so all of this needs to be considered during the vote. So yeah, but anyone can tomorrow publish a vote and start the conversation around this.
Okay, so it hasn't really sort of started yet.
I believe there might be an open conversation in the forum, but I haven't. It's not been the fee switch is not enabled currently in the protocol, and I haven't seen any vote that propose to activate it.
Yeah. Okay. Does the platform what sort of fees does the platform generate per month?
So you mean like borrowing interest generated by the protocol?
I was just talking about like protocol revenue, like whichever way you get it.
So the fee switch, so what I define as the fee switch is the cut that the protocol can take, right? So currently it's deactivated and the protocol is not generating any revenue. Maybe you're referring to fee switch as like the share that goes to token holders. Is that what you were referring to, or?
No, I thought I saw that the platform took like a 10% cut, but I think what I was looking at was it was the vault owner, like the person that sets up
Exactly.
the vault taking the cut. That's what I was
Right.
thinking of. So you'd have to, so it would add on it would add on an additional fee.
Right, exactly. And so I believe to date, in just a year, like the Morpho platform has generated like $100 million of interest. And out of that, like Vault creators are taking a fee, right? And it varies according to the Vault creator and what fees they decide to take. It's a free market, so you have healthy competition that pushes Vault managers to like select the right fee for the end user. And so they charge a fee for the curation exercise, and while Morpho charges a fee for the network effects, right? So if you take an Aave, the fee contains the two at the same time. Like the reason Aave creates value is because if you fork the Aave protocol, you don't have the state, you don't have the liquidity, right? And if you fork the Aave protocol, you don't have the management, right? And those are like the two most important like value creation um, that are in the Aave platform that in Morpho are unbundled, right? And one is taken by the vault managers, and the other could be taken by the Morpho DAO that hasn't activated it so far.
Morpho saw a peak total value locked of $4 billion earlier this year. Seems like quite a big rise over like the preceding 6 months or so. What do you think spurred on that increase in TVL?
Actually, a few things. Obviously there was an exciting time in the market, so rates were high. People were willing to essentially leverage on their position or take loans that were maybe a bit more expensive than usual, which drives interest up, which obviously drives capital in, etc., etc. I think what has been interesting is also like the diversity of the collaterals that are available in Morpho allowed the protocol to tackle new opportunities, right? That were not possible in existing lending platforms. And so we had builders, like for example, Spark slash Maker, Sky, that were able to generate yield for DAI and USDS on completely new opportunities, right? That they were not able to in their Aave free fork Sparkland that they used to run. And so those were a big driver of TVL in mid 2024. And then obviously the market conditions, etc. And I'd say there is essentially two growing curves overlapping here. There is just the momentum of the market, but there is also the momentum of creators themselves. Today, you have more than 25 creators on the Morpho protocol. Not only do they curate the risk, but they also do business development. They also look for new yield integration of their vault into distribution platform. And this is a slower growing curve, but a much more resilient one, where we have an army of like people working with us and empowering the Morpho network by bringing more capital into their vault, right? And I believe this is outside of like the big metrics that we're able to get to. This is the really interesting phenomenon that does not lead to as big numbers as 4 billion so quickly, but will eventually go much further in my opinion.
And with some of like the sort of vaults that we see on Morpho, I had a quick look, and they seem to be sort of broken down into in terms of like what they allocate into. It seems to be a lot of like stablecoin pairs, for instance, if you're like lending like stables. So is it simply that they just take the fees from providing liquidity in stables?
So sorry, can you elaborate on that a little bit? So what you're saying is like that most of the liquidity is on the stables, or like yeah.
So like when you go into like a stablecoin lending market, you like in the section under market allocation, it sort of breaks down. It shows sort of a lot of like stablecoin trading pairs. So like basically, I'm trying to find out what happens with the money once you lend it in sort of these sorts of vaults.
So to be clear, those are not trading pairs; they're lending pairs in the sense that when you're running, a USDC vault, what you're doing is that you're allocating USDC to Morpho markets, right? And Morpho markets are immutable lending and borrowing markets that are collateralized by one asset in order to borrow the other assets. So in this case, USDC. So if you're, for example, like a creator that has a USDC vault, you would allocate it to CBBTC USDC, which is a market that allows people to borrow USDC with CBBTC, with an oracle that could be Chainlink, and with a liquidation loan to value that could be like 86%, right? And so that would be one specific market. And so what happens with the money is that you deposit your money into those markets, and they generate yield from the borrowing of like the different users.
Okay, so it is all just over collateralized loans.
Yes, 100% our collateralized loans.
Okay, that's what I wanted until I had a look at it, and then I was like, saw these sort of what looked like trading pairs, and then I thought it was more like providing liquidity and more like it looked like more like strategies, rather than just like a variety of loans.
No, it's probably the product that needs clarifications here, but it is indeed our collateralized lending.
Yeah.
Only.
How do you think crypto lending has evolved over the last few years?
Obviously biased here, but I think the major shift has been moving from app to infrastructure, and from app to protocols, which is not specifically for DeFi lending, but if you look at the Uniswap P4, for example, it clearly is moving towards like a developer platform kind of thing, where Uniswap V2 as it is very usable both on the trading side and on the liquidity provision side. Very easy to use directly on chain. Uniswap V3 harder to use on the LP side, actually impossible if you don't want to lose money, and I mean very hard. And on the trading side, still a bit usable. Now, Uniswap before, clearly, whether you're on the trading side or on the LP side, like you can't use the smart contract as is, right? There are multiple layers of complexity that add up on top of one another. On the trading side is going to be Uniswap X, for example. On the LP side, it could be something like an Arrakis, right? That is going to, optimize your LP position, or simply just your market maker that is going to be the pro user, right, of those platforms. And so there is really a shift of like, with time, those primitives, those DeFi primitives are going to be used more and more by pro users, which is why we believe that, the complexity should be externalized, because now the users are able to, handle the complexity, and then they can package this into a vault that gets offered to more consumer users. And so this layering, for me, is the biggest realization, we had over the last 2 years, is there is the protocol layer, then there is like the prime layer where like some vault creators are going to like do the hard work on behalf of other people, which is the consumer that's going to end up like, um, consuming a very, easy like DeFi product, right? And I would say this is number one realization about DeFi lending, which is so the layering. And the second is really been like the interest of large distribution platforms into providing on-chain lending and borrowing. We can talk more about that, but that was the second like biggest realization.
And what's your view on the recent emergence of Wildcat, which is obviously a little bit different because it's not over collateralized as far as I believe. Like it's more, lending to more reputable institutions.
Right. So I haven't looked into Wildcat into too deep. I believe it's like mostly under collateralized loans. I've seen, a little bit of like Wintermute involvement as well in this project. My general thoughts on under collateralized lending is that it's not a black or white, like, it's not that something is completely over collateralized or something is completely under collateralized. It's just like every loan is function of some trust assumption, whether it's like a collateral or a name, a brand, etc. The big question is like, how do you bring this trust on chain, right? And how can the smart contract understand it and potentially liquidate or take different measures, right? In the case of quote unquote over collateralized lending, which I prefer to call like crypto backed lending, well, the trust assumption is the collateral, right? And the collateral guarantees. In case when it's under-collateralized, quote unquote, under-collateralized lending, could be something else. Maybe, you could bring your identity on chain with the right primitives, or maybe it's going to be a mix of like some cross-collateralization and, some other NFT that represents like whatever act of property of like a building with, your social graph, and all blended together is the trust that is actually now over collateralized because all of this can be valued and hence a loan can be taken. So I'd say this is my general thoughts on under collateralized lending. I think we'll definitely get there eventually. It's going to take a lot of time. For Wildcat specifically, I don't know, in the sense that I haven't been too deep into their mechanism.
And the sort of major news for Morpho recently has been your integration with Coinbase. So how big has that been for Morpho?
Right. So it's been awesome, frankly. Like, so maybe for context on what this integration means is that Coinbase is integrating lending and borrowing into their app, right? And in order for their users to borrow with crypto, this time they're not using centralized technology, but for the first time ever, the Coinbase retail app is directly leveraging decentralized technology. In that case, the base layer 2, right? And Morpho on the base layer 2, to be more specific, right? So what happens is that if you're a user in the Coinbase app, you know nothing about DeFi, you don't have a wallet, you don't know about chains, you don't know about gas, nothing. You come to the app and a wallet is pinned off behind the scenes and is gonna, wrap your BTC into CBBTC on base, is gonna deposit this collateral on Morpho, it's gonna borrow USDC, it's gonna transfer USDC to your account, it's gonna convert USDC into USD, all in, just a matter of seconds and one click, right? And this is what, Coinbase and Morpho have been working on for over a year together. And I believe is extremely excited because it truly shows for the very first time what crypto and DeFi in general is going to be useful for. For me, this is the very first time we have a fully integrated DeFi product into a large scale distribution that is, showing off the full power of leveraging decentralized technology. And by full power, I mean, for Coinbase, it's transparency, it's liquidity, and it's tech. So transparency is because anyone can audit every single cent of their lending and borrowing product, which was not the case in the FTX days. When FTX happened, no one could know if their margin engine was actually over collateralized. Here, everybody can look at it on chain. That's number one. Number two is the technology. Like Coinbase can just leverage like the margin engine of Morpho, and it's like completely open and can be used from our plug into our tech directly. And the third is staked, right? Where the liquidity that borrowers of Coinbase can access, can be the one of the Coinbase ecosystem, but not only. It can be also people lending from other platforms on Morpho. Is now liquidity that becomes accessible by Coinbase, right? And so when you think about it, Coinbase is now leveraging the full power of their decentralized infrastructure, because now they can connect liquidity from platforms that are outside, of their own ecosystem, which is extremely exciting in my opinion.
It's quite an interesting hybrid approach. Like one thing I do wonder about is it is sort of DeFi, but it is also very like Coinbase reliant, because you're talking about like you're taking your Bitcoin, maybe you're storing it in Coinbase, then you're swapping it into Coinbase's version of wrap Bitcoin, which is ultimately sort of like custodial. You're doing it on the base network, which is Coinbase owned and built, and you're swapping for you're lending and you're receiving like USDC stablecoin, which is issued by Circle, but very, very, closely involved with Coinbase. So yeah, it's kind of like it is sort of DeFi, but it's almost, you could argue you almost might as well be doing it within Coinbase if it's sort of that like closely involved.
Right. So I 100% agree with that observation, which shows two things. First, Coinbase has done an impressive work at like getting involved into every single part of the stack. But most importantly is that Coinbase recognizes the value of progressively losing power over its own infrastructure, which was, before it was completely centralized, like technology and infrastructure. Now it's progressively decentralizing. And the reason is that now, if you decentralize to some degree CBBTC, if you decentralize to some degree the layer two, you can connect with more opportunities that are not brought by Coinbase, but by other platforms that trust the infrastructure because it's sufficiently decentralized. And the real power of decentralization in the context of Coinbase, in my opinion, is that because there is sufficient trust guarantees for other platforms, they can connect into the same network and hence provide more liquidity, better pricing for Coinbase users, which will make Coinbase much more competitive when it's about like taking over, financial consumer applications, right? Because they have the best infrastructure.
What I thought was quite interesting is it provides a slightly different approach because it is sort of over collateralized, whereas like the current lending platforms aren't. I haven't looked into them recently, but I don't know if they're all like over collateralized. Um, do you think? I also think it's interesting because we're doing this with Bitcoin rather than like obviously everything previously has been mostly sort of Ether USDC based. Do you think that could like bring more people into feeling safer about lending out their Bitcoin?
Definitely. Like, I think for many people, at least many people we've talked to, like the FTX experience has been traumatizing, right? Like, and most of it actually were quote unquote over collateralized or were branded as over collateralized, right? Even though behind the scenes, the collateral was rehypothecated a ton and, was actually lent out to other entities, etc. So I think it can give the confidence eventually to the right people to actually get involved or come back to the space for those that had left it. Uh, I will say though that this is a bit theoretical for now. Like I haven't seen any proof that because it's on chain, people trust it more and they come back and more than centralized technology. I think it will be over time, right? But we haven't gotten to the point where it has lived long enough, it has enough Lindy, such that very large, because we've had so many hacks in DeFi that the trust has been lost so many times that it's hard to say, to raise the argument of it's on chain, so it's safer. Like, eventually people will understand that the protocol that got hacked, are usually very complex and are very different than, a Morpho integration with Coinbase, which only involves like 600 lines of code. Like literally, Coinbase only plugs into 600 lines of code on chain, which has probably the most amount of audits per line of code in the world. But I don't think people make the difference yet. They will eventually with Lindy and as we prove security over time, but it's not the case yet.
We haven't had a decentralized exchange hack in a while. Um, or like, sorry, I mean a DeFi hack in a while. So, like, I don't know if I'm jinxing it here.
It's true. because the space overall has been improving its security practices, etc., etc. I will say that especially for protocols that have a lot of complexity enshrined, maybe there's no hack, but there's a lot of war rooms, which is not the case of Morpho, but yeah, it's just like still very frequent in the space, even though it does not lead to massive hacks, right?
Yeah, that reminded me. I was thinking the other day because I saw obviously sort of Wildcat is starting to pick up in TVL, which is undercollateralized lending, and then I saw Andre Cronje tweeting that they think they might have built a new sort of algorithmic stablecoin design, and I was just like, wait, if we combine the two, we could really recreate the 2021-2022 environment and run it back.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a something about the space where like the ecosystem likes to overheat a little bit, and we've had the cycles of ups and downs, and obviously excitement leads to a lot of things happening, so less attention to details, and so naturally to more hacks, which decreases the amount of things going on because everybody calms down, which increases the focus, which have us build more technology. And because everything is open source, we're compounding over time on all of those mistakes. So I think overall, directionally, it's only going to get better, mostly thanks to open source and the openness of the space. However, I'm not, I'm not saying we'll never, DeFi won't be hacked ever again. I think it would be very wrong for me to say that.
What were your thoughts on how the Bybit hack went down? Like in terms of safe, I saw you tweeting about it.
So first, the Bybit hack is scary. I'd say that's like the gut reaction is like a lot of teams and individuals were performing under the trust assumptions that were broken during this hack, I would say, right? And they were not like, what I'm trying to say here is that many, many, many people could have been, hacked in the same way, right? I believe, though, that this is an opportunity to reduce even further the trust assumptions that we have operating in this space to make it even safer, right? I think the complexity of the hack was fairly advanced, and apparently was done by Lazarus Group, which is very likely state funded by North Korea and has a lot of means, etc. So what I'm saying is that we're pushing every time the limits of the attackers, and I think it's going to get increasingly extremely hard for them to actually do things. Maybe it's a bit unrealistic, but I truly think so. So I take this as a learning opportunity of reducing the trust assumptions to almost zero. Whereas when you operate in the non-crypto world, of course, you don't have such massive hacks happening every now and then, but it's full of trust assumptions everywhere. And it's more security by obscurity, in the sense that you don't know how things operate, so it's very hard to hack, and everything is a black box, etc. Right? And so in an open world, of course, you go through many hacks, but over the long term, again, through the same arguments that I was describing, you build much stronger resiliency. And I take this as a very big learning opportunity for the crypto space, and also for the competitiveness of the security space. A lot of multi-sig providers are going to try to improve on their own security practices, or a lot of companies that rely on multi-sigs will improve their own security practices from this event, right?
I'm seeing a lot of commentary about stable coins sort of having the most product market fit, but everyone sort of seems to be just very focused on them as they're the sort of successful thing within crypto. Do you think that's the case?
Well, yes. Stablecoins do have decent product market fit. I think competition will increase quite fast, actually, in the sense that stablecoins will be pushed more and more to provide either yield in somewhere or another to their users, and give back the treasury backing more and more in somewhere or another. I believe that's an interesting first step for like crypto. Now, stablecoins on their own, can achieve a lot, but won't unlock the full power of DeFi. Like, what's really interesting is that what you can do with your stablecoin once you have it. And oftentimes when I talk to institutional players, looking at stablecoins, etc., like what's blocking at the decision level is like, what for? Like, you have this guy, handling the crypto section in this big, institution, and they need to push some use case, like, having some stablecoins or building their own stablecoin is something, but then their leadership is going to be like, what for? Right. And then the next step to this is like, hey, what if you could connect to hundreds and hundreds of yield opportunities and connect with a bunch of other people that are also using this stablecoin, but inside those DeFi products. And this is where it's like the big unlock for most of them. And this is how you get past the decision threshold of the leadership of those big institutions. And they're like, hey, oh, okay, I see the point of this. Like, it's actually an infinite garden in which, like, we can interact with a bunch of things and integrate very easily. And so I think, to me, this is the most interesting part of stablecoins. But for sure, for now, it's like the biggest like PMF in DeFi, like, quote unquote.
What do you think of Trump's project, World Liberty Financial? Obviously, they're sort of set up by people who were involved with Doe Finance back in the day.
I don't have a strong opinion on the WLF team. I haven't seen much on the project itself, to be frank. Like, I know they're building like a lending, product that aims at being, targeting, consumer, especially American consumers, and providing like a very simple and easy to use user experience. Um, I'm yet to be sold on how they're gonna achieve that. But obviously, have very strong connections and network. So I'm sure they can go a long way. But yeah, it's hard for me to give an opinion given like that I haven't seen too much on the product side of things.
Okay. And which layer twos do you think are the most successful right now?
Obviously, Base has been, a very successful, Base and Arbitrum have been like, from a DeFi standpoint, have been the two, most interesting. I believe that the question of the excitement of the layer two is going to be more and more linked to the interop solution that they're using. Just because I don't think we'll be thinking of like one specific layer two in a few months from now, but more as a network of layer two, whether it's like the Arbitrum stack, the Opti stack, the ZK stack, Polygon stack, etc. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is that I hope that we won't have to, in a few months from now, we won't have that layer twos will start interoperating with one another, and we won't have to say, oh, this layer two is performing better than the other, etc. Because whatever the layer two your funds are in, you can use them to deposit into a Morpho vault, or etc. etc. Like, and that the borders will finally erase. Is my hope, and I'm very hopeful about that.
And with the launch of like Unichain, we're starting to see app chains within the Ethereum ecosystem. Do you anticipate Morpho chain?
This is something we've been, looking into. Obviously, at the moment, we have no like, nothing to share on this, or but I'd say in general there are strong arguments to make NAP specific chains that, if you want to have control over the gas price, if you want to have control over block time, if you want to, have ownership over the fees paid for the execution of the trades on your protocol, that's also something that could be interesting. In some cases, it can be interesting to customize a bit the opcodes, etc. I think having your own layer two, frankly, especially in a world where interop is working and is working well, won't make much sense in a general purpose way, but more on a NAP specific way. So what I'm trying to get to here is that I don't see a future with 10 general purpose chain interoperating with one another. I see a future with 10 app-specific chain interacting with one another the same way two smart contracts could, interact on Ethereum. And I believe like the new smart contract could be the layer 2 eventually. But that can be potentially very far away in the future, like talking 5-10 years, right? Like it's really in order to get to like very similar atomicity properties as Ethereum, like it's all doable in theory. It just takes a huge amount of time in order to solve the problems. I think as a community, we figured out the theoretical solutions to those problems. We know it's all feasible. We know interop is solvable. But now is more the question is more when, right? And this I'm not an expert in the field. I could not tell. Like,
but you think app chains are the future?
I think in a world where we solve all the interoperability problems, I believe it's a very nice future for Ethereum. And I don't have a strong enough conviction to say this is the future. I believe it 100%. But I really think that's the direction where we're going at this point. But yeah.
And then what's next for Morpho?
Right. Well, over the last year, Morpho has been working on like how can we get this Morpho stack, integrated into large-scale distribution partners, right? And such like the Coinbase example is just like one example that would inspire many others. And how can we connect all the financial opportunities of all those different financial applications with one common backend that is run, on chain? So a lot of the team effort has been working towards making this a reality, whether it is by improving the protocol and figuring out what could be next iterations of it, or by simply connecting and working on integrating those large scale distribution programs. So that has been the focus, mostly. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank Paul for joining this episode, and thanks again to our sponsor, Awaken. As a reminder, our newsroom works tirelessly to get you accurate, informed crypto news. If you want to stay ahead, make sure to read the blog. Thanks, and see you next time.